Hi guys, so Zack Polanski, the leader of the Green Party, was on the Laura Kuenssberg show on Sunday where he was talking about debt, taxes and the economy. Now, he also called out this false narrative that the media and politicians push, that the economy is a little bit like a household one. And unfortunately, Laura Kuenssberg tried to cling on to that. Have a listen.
Well, exactly. So what I think we need to do is get back to a place where actually democratic politicians who are elected by the people are more worried about the cleaners, the teachers, the nurses, the people on the ground who are actually creating the economy with their hands, rather than the people who hold these assets, who are making money while they sleep without actually working. That's deeply problematic. Now, are the markets important? Of course, they play a role. But much more important is the trust of the public on the politicians that they democratically elect. And we've gone so far the other way.
But the public didn't trust the government very much when Liz Truss completely freaked out the financial markets by promising billions of unfunded tax cuts. Again, you might not like it.
Well, Liz Truss was an absolute disaster.
But the real world that we're in right now, and you might want a completely different shape of economy. I think you do.
Yes, absolutely.
But the real world that we live in is that this country owes trillions of pounds to the financial markets, and therefore decisions that politicians take, don't they have to take that into account? You can't wish away the overdraft.
So I'm definitely not going to defend Liz Truss. I don't think anyone should. But actually, you said it really well. She was borrowing for unfunded tax cuts. What I'm talking about is borrowing for capital, infrastructure and investment that essentially creates spending multipliers that comes back into the economy. Second, though, in terms of the borrowing, a lot of that borrowing is from the Bank of England. That's money we owe to ourselves. It's not borrowing or debt in any real sense. Also, it's a lot of foreign countries who want to have that debt because actually that's a good investment for them because we have a relatively stable currency.
But before we get into, we could go down a really esoteric debate about economics.
It is important though, because
it is important.
Can I say one other thing on that though, on the esotericism?
Well, I want to ask you,
a household economy is nothing like a national budget, and we really need to break that metaphor.
And of course it is not the same thing. But people look at the government in terms of what they borrow and what they spend and how they raise money through our taxation.
But we need to break that metaphor because it's a completely different way of looking at the economy, which is really important.
I just want to get a specific answer to that question.
So she was doubling down. You know, she's defending this narrative, it seems, or attempting to defend it. This ridiculous narrative that the economy as a whole is like a household economy, where you have money coming in and you have money going out and you need to balance the books. No, the government are able to create money. A household economy is not able to do that. And this ridiculous narrative needs to be destroyed because people are being convinced that, well, the government needs to impose austerity because they haven't enough finance, they haven't enough money. Now, Zack pointed out here something that's really important. What Liz Truss did in 2022 was borrow to engage in tax cuts, and they were unfunded. So she was not actually going to invest anything in the economy. This was her whole ideology, and the IEA's ideology is, well, if you cut taxes, then this will stimulate growth. No, it doesn't. What Zack is talking about is borrowing to invest in infrastructure. Now, the only problem with this is, and I agree with him, but there is a problem here. The problem is that a lot of the investment has not been going into public services and staying in there. The problem is a lot of it has been going into the private sector. And this has been happening since the 1990s. So the government borrows a lot of money. They're supposed to be investing it in infrastructure, whatever, and they start doing that. But a lot of that money is seeping away into the private sector. And then where does it go? It goes into the pockets of the multimillionaires and billionaires, the shareholders. That money is not reinvested in that public service. And you end up with a situation where schools are being built and they cost hundreds of millions of pounds when they could have been built for a tenth of that. And then at the end, the government would actually have an asset. It would own the school. But at the moment, it's not the case. That's just one example. There are numerous examples where the government is pumping money into what seems to be the public sector, but it's filtered away. It's seeping away into the private sector. So that needs to stop. The investment has to go into the public sector and has to remain there. But he's also correct that if you invest in infrastructure, you're going to get that money back. For example, if you build an industrial zone or if you build an airport, for example, you're going to see small businesses around that. You're going to get money back on that investment. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create prosperity in that area, and there are numerous examples of that. You'll also find examples of it failing. But as a whole, when the government invest, they get money back, unless that money is going into the private sector. So the problem is not so much borrowing itself, it's where the money goes. Liz Truss was borrowing for tax cuts. It seems that Zack Polanski wants to borrow more, but to see that money going into public services. And it makes sense. The opposite, of course, is austerity. And we saw the result of austerity. So the Conservatives and Reform are pushing, no, we need to reduce the size of the state. We need to cut public services because we can't afford it. But if you cut public services, you actually make people worse off, and you make the economy worse off because there are less people spending money because they have less money in their pockets. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.